Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is distilling an argument. And like I said, the first day of class, logic, we are interested in the structure of an argument. And distilling is a first step and a very good first step. And I think honestly a necessary first step to really seeing what the structure of an argument is and whether it's a good one, whether the person's giving us a convincing argument. So what you want to do when you distill an argument, two things. One, you want to look, and anywhere that the person uses rhetoric, you just want to get rid of. You don't want to put it in the argument when you distill it. You also like anywhere where the person repeats themselves. They might repeat the conclusion a bunch of times. Sometimes that's good writing. People want you to know what the conclusion is. Sometimes it's just like, well, if I repeat it a bunch, people are going to believe it, right? They might repeat premises. If somebody repeats something, don't put it twice, right? Just put it there one time. You know, think about my solar panel salesman, right? If he tells me how much money it's going to save me, if he says it 8 times, he's not giving me any more reason to buy solar panels than if he just says it once, right? Maybe as a rhetorical tactic, it'll work better if you say it a whole bunch of times, but you're not giving any more reason by repeating it over and over. So get rid of that too. So what's that going to look like? Let me give you guys an example. So let's talk about, let me give you guys an example of just some arguments you might use, right? Make sure I'm giving you the right screen here. I feel like Zoom has gotten worse for a lot of things over time, right? So let me give you guys an example. There are a couple arguments here, just sort of toy arguments that I came up with, but let's talk about distilling them, right? And when you do anything with an argument, distilling any argument you see written, the first thing you should do is always figure out what you think the conclusion is. Read the whole thing. What is the conclusion, right? So, those with weak minds and no patience, here's just my first argument. Like I said, it's a toy argument. Those with weak minds and no patience may never be convinced to pick up a book, especially a history book. But for those whose brains have not been rotted by constant phone use, Jonathan Healy's The Blazing World, A New History of Revolutionary England, is a worthwhile read indeed. Healy's book tells the story of the English Civil War, a period which set the stage in many ways for the American Revolution. The whole period is also one of war, political intrigue, and shifting alliances that is every bit as interesting as Game of Thrones. And Healy is a good writer who presents his yarn admirably well. So if you're one of those fortunate souls who still has the attention span to actually read a book, then pick up Healy's The Blazing World. All right. So what's the conclusion here, right? Well, think about it this way, right? I state the conclusion here twice. Healy's The Blazing World is a worthwhile read. And, I say pretty much the same thing. Pick up Healy's The Blazing World, right? Now, what you could do, you could just cut one of these lines and use that as the conclusion, or you could rephrase it, right? And a lot of times it's good to rephrase. Van Cleve talks about rephrasing the conclusion. If you had to rephrase this, what would be a good way to rephrase it? Think something very simple like, you should read Healy's The Blazing World, right? Not what either place I state the conclusion literally says, but that's what the argument's trying to get you to do, right? Read this book. Now we go through and we look for rhetoric, right? Well, those with weak minds and no patience, blah, 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 right? Am I giving you any good reason to think that this is a good book? No, I'm basically just making you think that smart people will read this book. You don't want to be on team dumb, right? Look, this is really blunt. Most of the time when people use rhetoric, it's not this ham-fisted, but I'm making it ham-fisted to make a point, right? So those with meek minds, no patience, blah, blah, blah. That's all rhetoric. Those whose brains have not been rotted by constant phone use, also all rhetoric. I will highlight this, you know, just to make a point here. Let's put it in red, or actually that's purple. Fine, I like purple better anyway, right? That's all rhetoric. Get rid of it, right? Healy's The Blazing World. Is it worthwhile read? Indeed. Well, that's not rhetoric, but we've already put it there. That's in our conclusion. We don't need to think about it again. Healy's book tells the story of the English Civil War. That's just telling us what the book's about. Period which set the stage in many ways for the American Revolution. Well, now this sentence here, you know, that's actually giving us a reason, right? You might think it's a good reason, you might think it's a bad reason, but this is a reason, right? And so we can, if we want to be lazy, why not be lazy, right? If we can be, we'll just cut and paste, right? Right. If we are interested in the American Civil War or the American Revolution, it's a reason to read the book. The whole period is also one of war, political intrigue, and alliances that are every bit as interesting as Game of Thrones. We could reword this. It might be good to reword this. Again, we could just be lazy for the time being. Cut, replace, right? This is giving us a reason to read the book, telling us the book is entertaining, right? We could just cut and paste, or we could say something like, it's a really interesting period in history. You know, we can argue about whether that captures all the meaning. If you want to play it safe, just cut and paste. You can also do that. All right, we keep going. Healy is a good writer who presents the yarn admirably well. So if you're one of those fortunate souls who still has the attention span to read a book, then pick up Healy's The Blazing World, right? This is obviously just more rhetoric. You're a smart person. You want to be smart, read this book, right? Not giving us any good reason to do that. So, more rhetoric, get rid of it. Pick up Healy's The Blazing World. We've already got that. That's the conclusion, but it says here Healy is a good writer who presents the yarn admirably well. Well, if that's true, probably a good reason to read the book. So once we're done, always start with the conclusion, but the conclusion, once you're distilling the argument, it should go at the end. Um, you can just say conclusion. You can also use one of these conclusion marker words. There's also a little symbol we'll talk about later, like three little dots. That's a way to represent a conclusion, right? We have distilled this argument, tells the story of the English Civil War, tells a good story, you know, presumably we're interested in the American Revolution. If you're not, this might not be a good reason for you, but it is a reason he offers. Book tells the story of a really interesting period in history. Be a reason to read it, right? If you're going to read a book, especially a history book, interesting period, right? Don't want to read about 30 years where nothing happened, right? There's periods in history where people are happy and living like wonderful lives are not the most fun to read about, right? Healy is a good writer. If he is, in fact, a good writer, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But if he is, that is a reason to read this book. Conclusion, read Healy's The Blazing World, right? You might guess this is the book I'm reading right now. It actually is pretty good, a lot going on, a lot of shifting alliances and stuff. I'm not saying everybody has to read it, right? Just picking random examples from my own life. All right. So that's distilling one argument. Let's look at another one and how we would distill it, right? Again, let's think about what the conclusion is here, how we would state it. I have nothing against math. Honestly, I find it quite beautiful, oddly enough. But should we make every student learn higher level math? That's a different question entirely, and one that I must say no to. French cooking, calligraphy, and ice skating are all beautiful and develop uniquely human capacities, but we don't make every student who wants a high school degree learn them. Students should only be required to learn things that will be useful in their day-to-day lives or necessary to their jobs, and mathematics beyond arithmetic is neither. So we shouldn't require students to learn any mathematics past basic arithmetic. Don't get me wrong, I think students who will use it in their jobs or just find it interesting should have the chance to take classes like algebra, geometry, and even calculus, but no one should be required to. Now think about this. What is the overall conclusion of this passage? What is the person trying to get us to believe or do? Well, it's just, we want to be careful. We don't want to attribute something stupid to them, right? Think about the principle of charity. We want to be fair. We don't want to say nobody ever ought to learn any math. That's not what they believe, right? We don't want math classes shouldn't be offered in high school. That's also not what they believe. What they believe, what they're saying is students should not be required to take any math classes past arithmetic. And if we wanted to be really fair, we might say, we might include everything. Students should have the option to take upper level math. No one should be required. I think this, we want to try to be fair. Remember, this principle of charity, I will bang on and on about it. It's very important. We want to give the person the most sensible, commonsensical conclusion that what they're saying would support. Here, that would be something like students should have the option to take upper level math. No one should be required to learn math past arithmetic. That is our conclusion. Now let's look and see what we have here. I have nothing against math. Well, what's the person doing? Is that giving us any reason to think we shouldn't have math? No, they're trying to say, well, look, trust me, I'm fair, I'm even-handed, I don't have an axe to grind. This is rhetoric, right? Honestly, I find it quite beautiful. Oddly enough, they're going even deeper. They're saying, look, I actually love math. Trust me, I love math. If even I think kids shouldn't have to learn it, you know, that's not giving us a reason to think this is true. Should we make every student learn higher level math? Rhetorical question, right? Rhetoric, right? That's a different question entirely, and one I must say no to. Is there anything here we need to put in distilling it? No, right? One that I must say no to, that's kind of a statement of the conclusion, but we already have that here. All the rest of this is rhetoric. You know, we could just highlight it as we've been highlighting rhetoric and other stuff, right? I'm not doing a good job highlighting. French cooking, calligraphy, and ice skating are all beautiful and develop, human capacities, but we don't make every student who wants a high school degree learn them now, do we? I think this is actually giving us a reason, right? These things, there are lots of things that are useful or cool. We don't make students learn. Math might be useful and cool, but if there's other useful and cool things that we don't make students learn to graduate high school, why make them learn math to graduate, right? So we might cut and paste that as one of our premises. We might reword this a little bit. If there are all these other cool and possibly useful things we don't make students learn, well, that gives us some reason to think that, we shouldn't make them learn math just because it might be cool or useful, right? Students should only be required to learn things that will be useful in their day-to-day lives, and mathematics beyond arithmetic is neither. Well, that gives us a pretty good reason. If that's true, if we really accept that principle and math is neither, then yeah, good reason to accept this conclusion, right? Now, we might look at this. Students shall be required to learn things that will be useful in their day-to-day lives or necessary to their jobs, and mathematics beyond arithmetic is neither. These are actually two different thoughts, right? One is a principle of what students should be required to learn. One is a description of mathematics that it's not useful, right? I think this would actually be better if we broke this sentence down into two premises because there's two different thoughts being expressed here. So, mathematics beyond arithmetic is neither nether, right? I can't spell. Necessary for students' future jobs. And we might even tinker with this more, right? Because the person might not say this the best way. Obviously, given what they say later, they think there might be some jobs it's useful for. So we might even, if we're trying to be charitable and we should be, give them the best case, we might say is not useful for most students' future jobs, right? That is a charitable gloss on this. They don't literally say it, but we want to give them the best case possible. We don't want them to say something false. If we say it's not useful for anybody's future jobs, that's just false, right? If you're going to be an engineer, you're going to use math. If you're going to be a math teacher, you're going to use math, right? If you are going to be a philosophy professor, you might not. I mean, actually do, right? We're going to do some math later in the semester, but it's pretty simple stuff, right? Anyway, don't get me wrong. I think students who will use it in their jobs or just find it interesting should have a chance to learn, take classes like all of these, but no one should be required to, right? This is a weird sort of mixed sentence. Part of it's more rhetoric, trust me, I'm not partisan. Part of it is a restatement of the conclusion. If I gave you a trick question, is this rhetoric or not? I don't know, right? You might rephrase it in a way that's not. But all of this that's not just pure rhetoric, we already have here in the conclusion. So we can just get rid of it. We have now distilled this argument. Bunch of rhetoric here we got rid of, and some repetition. The conclusion was repeated two different ways in two different forms. We get rid of that. We are left with a distilled argument. This is what is the reason here. If there is a reason to believe the claim, that's what we have left here. That's what distilling an argument is. That is really the first step to evaluating the structure of an argument, whether it's a good one. So I hope you guys have some idea of this because we're going to be doing a lot of this next class, and it really is a first step and a valuable one. All right. The lights in my office went off, so I suppose that's a good reason to stop here. We will, oh God, we'll do a lot more practice with this next time, and I will record future lectures in some place that's not my office or get some better lighting.